There is a woman living in Portland, Oregon who has spent the last 15 years doing something the fashion industry told her was impossible. She designed clothes for women nobody wanted to dress. She built a brand from nothing with her own hands, her own sewing machine, and a rage so quiet and so focused it looked like confidence. She put supersized women on runways. She made 500-pound women feel like royalty. She did all of this before body positivity became a marketing strategy, before plus-size influencers became a brand category, before the word representation meant anything to anyone trying to sell you something. And then the world she built collapsed around her. And what she did next, what she became after the collapse, split her entire community in two. This is the story of Shauna Farmer, the woman the internet knows as SSBBW Sasha, the fat queen of the Pacific Northwest, and one of the most complicated, controversial, and quietly remarkable women the plus-size world has ever produced. To understand who Sasha is today, you have to understand what she was building long before most people knew her name. Shauna Farmer was born on December 23, 1981 in the United States. From an early age, she gravitated toward fabric, toward craft, toward the tactile problem-solving of making something with her hands. Sewing wasn't a hobby for Shauna, it was a language. It was the way she understood the world and her place in it. But as she grew up, she kept running into the same wall that millions of plus-size women run into every single day. The fashion industry, a trillion-dollar machine built on the premise of making people feel good about how they look, had decided, quietly and systematically, that women above a certain size didn't deserve to feel good at all. Not really, not in the way that counted. There were options, technically, there were always options, but they were the options of an afterthought, shapeless, apologetic, designed not to celebrate a body but to conceal it, to manage it, to make it as invisible as possible in public spaces where thinness was the only acceptable form of visibility. Shauna looked at that and felt something most people in her position were taught to suppress. She felt anger, and she decided to do something with it. In the early 2010s, Shauna Farmer launched a boutique plus-size clothing brand called Chubby Cartwheels. The name itself was a provocation, deliberate, precise, and brilliant. A cartwheel, pure physical joy, the kind of unrestrained, unself-conscious movement that had been culturally assigned to thin bodies, to children, to athletes, to people who had earned the right to take up space with enthusiasm, not to fat women, never to fat women. Shauna put that image on her brand and dared you to have a problem with it. Chubby Cartwheels stocked sizes 1X through 5X with custom sizing available for women who exceeded even those expanded measurements. The clothing line was called Curves Reign, and it looked nothing like what the plus-size market was used to offering. These weren't tent dresses. These weren't elastic waist compromise garments designed to disappear on a body. These were figure-hugging silhouettes, vinyl bodysuits, structured dresses that accentuated curves rather than hiding them, crop tops. Designs that said loudly and without apology that a supersized woman's body was worth dressing beautifully. The brand attracted some of the most well-known names in the SSBBW community. Courtney Mina, known online as Plump Princess, modeled for Chubby Cartwheels. Megan Kerr wore her designs. Women who had built followings by simply refusing to be invisible rallied around what Shauna was creating, because it was the first time someone had created something specifically for them, not for a watered-down, mainstream palatable version of plus size, but for their actual bodies at their actual size. And Shauna wasn't just selling online, she was showing up in person. She showcased Chubby Cartwheels at Portland's annual Unmentionable Fashion Show, a local event dedicated to challenging the boundaries of what bodies got to be celebrated in public, on a stage, under lights. Shauna brought her supersized designs to that runway and showed the room something it hadn't seen before. The community didn't just respond, it held on. But Chubby Cartwheels was only half of who Shauna Farmer was. Because running in parallel to the designer, the seamstress, the community builder, there was Sasha. SSBBW Sasha. Online, particularly on X, formerly Twitter, where she had been active since February 2009, Shauna operated under a different identity and with a completely different energy. She called herself the fat goddess of the Pacific Northwest. She called herself a queen. She built a following that had nothing to do with fashion and everything to do with presence. The sheer, unapologetic force of a woman at over 500 pounds who refused to treat her body as a problem to be solved. By the time most of the internet was discovering body positivity through filtered selfies and sponsored posts, Sasha had been in this world for years. She wasn't a trend, She wasn't a moment. She was an original, someone who had been loudly, defiantly fat online when doing so came with real social consequences, not just comment section criticism, but the kind of deep, grinding invisibility that the internet inflicts on bodies it has decided it doesn't want to see. Sasha made herself impossible to ignore. And the audience that found her and held on to her did so because she was offering something that sanitized, brand-approved body positivity never could. She wasn't asking for acceptance. She wasn't pleading for inclusion. She was commanding worship. There is a difference, and her audience felt it. Then 2020 arrived, and with it, everything changed. The COVID-19 pandemic didn't just shut down businesses. It dismantled entire ecosystems. Small independent brands that depended on community events, personal relationships, physical product, and the kind of word-of-mouth energy that only lives in rooms full of people, those brands were the most vulnerable. And Chubby Cartwheels was exactly that kind of brand. The boutique closed permanently during the pandemic. No dramatic announcement, no farewell tour, just gone. For the women who had built their wardrobes around it, who had finally found a designer who understood their bodies and treated them as worth dressing beautifully, the loss was real. It wasn't just a store closing. It was one of the only places that had ever taken them seriously as consumers, as women, as human beings who deserved to look good. The community mourned it publicly, and Shauna, who had spent a decade pouring herself into that brand, was left to figure out what came next. What came next divided people. With Chubby Cartwheels gone, Sasha shifted her focus entirely to content creation. The Instagram following grew, the X following surpassed 85,000. She launched her own website. She built out her All My Links page. She created content on her own terms, on her own schedule for an audience that was prepared to pay for access to her. And here is where the conversation gets complicated. Because the content Sasha moved toward, the identity she leaned into fully after the brand closed, sits in territory that the body positivity community has never been able to agree on. There are people who look at what Sasha does now and see exploitation. A woman who built her reputation on the serious, politically charged work of plus-size visibility, now packaging herself for an audience with motivations that have nothing to do with liberation. Critics argue that the same community that celebrated her fashion brand was now watching her redirect that visibility towards something that reduces rather than elevates. Others push back hard on that framing. They argue that policing how a fat woman chooses to monetize her own body is itself a form of the same control that the fashion industry exercised when it refused to dress her. That a woman at over 500 pounds, classified in the plus-size community as a SSBBW, an ultra-super-sized big beautiful woman existing loudly, financially independently, and entirely on her own terms is not a contradiction of body liberation. It is body liberation, the most radical version of it. Both sides of this argument are having it right now, online, in comment sections, in community spaces, with real heat and real stakes. And Sasha, for her part, has never seemed particularly interested in resolving it for anyone's comfort. She is 43 years old. She still lives in the Pacific Northwest. She still posts. She still calls herself a queen and means it without irony. She still has 122,000 followers on Instagram under the Chubby Cartwheels handle, a monument to a brand that no longer exists but refuses to be forgotten, and a community that has followed her through every version of herself she has chosen to become. She is a seamstress who became a designer who became a content creator who became, depending on who you ask, either a symbol of radical fat liberation or a cautionary tale about what happens when a community loses its most visible institution to forces beyond its control. What she has never been, not once, through any chapter of this story, is small. And in a world that spent decades insisting that women who look like her should be, that alone tells you everything you need to know about Shauna Farmer. The fat queen of the Pacific Northwest. Still reigning. If this story moved you, subscribe to What Really Happened To. New documentaries every week. Hit the bell so you never miss one.